Climate change has been described by some as the greatest threat facing humanity. Experts predict natural disasters and food and water shortages will have created some 50 million environmental refugees by 2010. Most of them will come from poor countries whose natural resources have been affected by the pollution emitted by developed nations. I'm Fauzia Ibrahim. In this edition of 101 East, we ask, should industrial countries be held responsible for climate refugees? Bangladesh is feeling the heat of climate change. Scientists claim that sea levels could rise 1 meter this century, plunging nearly 20% of the country underwater and forcing millions of people from their homes and farms. But some skeptics question the evidence and call it alarmist. However, as Hal Davis reports, some local Bangladeshis are already losing a battle against the sea.
All the land went into the sea. So I found that it was hard to make a living. It was a struggle to survive, so I had to leave. Now there is seawater and people operate their boats there.
It's a heartbreaking return to his former home in southern Bangladesh for Mohammed Akayam. His family farmed here for decades before the sea swept away their land and their house.
When I see that place, I feel very down. We became landless, homeless. We lost our land. So I feel very bad when I think about it.
Fishing nets now mark where his family home used to be. It's a common story here on the island of Kutubdia, where despite the building of sea defences, the erosion of the land seems to be gathering pace. Many experts say climate change is one of the most significant factors in such erosion, a result of rising sea levels.
Now, climate change, in my opinion, is a misnomer. What is happening now is climate destabilization, which is irreversible and catastrophic. Now, climate change and greenhouse gas reduction, global warming, this is the packaging, this is the word that has been used. But it's really the total destabilization of the climate, which has severe impact of agriculture everywhere.
Bangladesh, Atiq Rahman says, is at the front line of climate change. Culprit, the country's geography. Hundreds of rivers flow through it, causing massive floods and erosion along their banks. And even more damaging, much of this country of over 150 million is barely above sea level.
Bangladesh is only 5 meters above the sea level. That's the average altitude of Bangladesh. And you can understand that in the long run, any major changes in the sea level will have a tremendous effect on Bangladesh. It is also the most densely populated country in the world, having more than 2,000 people per square kilometer.
Kutubdia has seen hundreds of families forced from their homes in recent years. That's led to extraordinary sights like this one. A freshwater well that once stood in the middle of a village, now stranded on a beach with seawater all around.
It used to be a very nice place at that time. There are many houses around this well, and in the middle there was a road, and on both sides of it there were houses. People walked up and down the street here just 2 years ago.
It's a mark of how severe coastal erosion is here, that this is now just a desolate beach. Locals say that just a few years ago, 100 families lived here. They're now gone, their homes destroyed by the sea, and the people scattered inland. But while people are certainly suffering in Bangladesh, climate change skeptics argue the picture is complicated. While some areas suffer erosion, in others land is actually being formed, where the country's huge rivers dump sediment.
Several billion tons of sediments are entering into the system. These are building the delta for thousands of years.
Dr. Sarkar's satellite images show almost a balance between land being created and land lost to the sea. But those who support the idea that the world climate is changing say that's less important than evidence showing sea levels are likely to rise significantly in coming decades.
As the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said, that by the end of the century there will be 80 to 90 centimeter sea level rise. The point is that the subsequent science has already superseded that, and it will be much, much higher than that. We don't know exactly how high. We are putting it between 1 to 1.5 meter. Now the timing depends on how rapidly is the melting of the Arctic and the Antarctic. All data over the last year or so shows that it's dramatic melting going on.
If those predictions are right, then Bangladesh faces a grim future. Climate change means not just higher sea levels, but more and stronger cyclones. This in a nation that produces a fraction of the greenhouse gases of industrialized countries. Calls for compensation from the developed world are already being heard. But in the current economic climate, they're unlikely to be heeded. That means there's likely to be many more people like Mohammed, once prosperous by local standards, now forced to scratch a living as best they can.
At that time, life was beautiful. We had a better standard of living. But when we couldn't survive, I had to move. Now our life is worse. We are struggling, in fact. Earlier we had everything: a house, land, our own home. Our former life was better.
Joining us to discuss climate change, we have from Nairobi, Nick Nuttall, spokesman from the United Nations Environment Programme. And in Stockholm, Dr. Nils Axel Morner, Associate Professor from Stockholm University. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Dr. Morner, if I can start with you. You've studied sea levels for about 35 years now, and you've been quoted as saying the sea is not rising, it has not risen for 50 years. How do you explain that to people like Mohammed Ikam from our story, who's watched his farm, watched his home being washed away?
It's, as a matter of fact, it is simple. Because in a coastal area, it's always waves and this, you are fighting with the sea. In a delta, it's even worse, because the delta is by itself, because with the sediment loading, it is usually subsiding. And we heard in what was read that one man had studied the delta. There were erosion in one place and deposition in another.
Let me just ask you then,
Yes.
do you believe that global warming
Yes.
is a fallacy?
Temperature is always changing. It is primarily changing due to the sun, not to carbon dioxide. And what is being said about the sea level is exceptionally much exaggerated.
Can I just get Mr. Nuttall's opinion here? Do you think that global warming is due to the sun? It is a natural environment. It is a natural phenomenon.
You know, I was rather interested in the opening section of this program where your reporter said that climate skeptics say it's more complex than perhaps we think. And I'd fully agree with that, but I'd also fully like to point out that only 10 or 15 years ago, climate skeptics refused point blank around the world to believe that mankind had anything to do with climate change. So now they think it's more complex today. The gentleman on the line here who thinks it's all to do with the solar activity is probably fully aware of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's 2,000 plus scientists established by UNEP and the World Meteorological Organization. They have taken the solar cycle into their calculations and came to the conclusion in 2007 that there is more than a 90% certainty that climate change is happening linked with human activity. And you know, if you were sick and you felt unwell and you decided to go and see 2,000 doctors and they said you better give up smoking and you better put yourself on a diet, and then you go and see this chap in Stockholm who says, no, don't worry about it, carry on smoking and eat as much as you want, whom do you believe? The 2,000 hand-picked doctors from around the world,
Very strange way of
the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or one or two chaps in Sweden?
Dr. Morner.
I'm sorry?
Dr. Morner, what do you say to that?
Okay, what kind of rhetoric is that? We are not discussing smoking. This man on the other side of the earth is repeating something which the IPCC have said. Exactly, it's very much meteorologists. Meteorologists talking about sea level. Meteorologists working with computers. I am working in the actual field, and me and my friends are actual sea level specialists. And for example, in the Maldives, which have been doomed to be flooded, sea is not rising. And it doesn't matter what you say on the other side of the globe, because you are working with computer models and with preconceived ideas. And it has nothing to do with cigarettes and tobacco and so on. Just leave that out. Go into the field, work with the actual figures.
Dear doctor,
where we should be.
Doctor, dear professor, you know, in 1987, UNEP and the World Meteorological Organization established the Intergovernmental Panel on Change. These were handpicked, these scientists, by their own governments
we know that.
in fields like sea level rise, but also in many, many, many other areas, economic and social.
Gentlemen,
you know, we spent 20 years with people like yourself saying it's not happening, and we have wasted 20 years.
Gentlemen, if I can just cut in here, we can continue to fight and argue about evidence and about who does what sort of research and how that research is carried out. And we will come back to discuss the Maldives and other issues as well. When we come back from the break, we'll hear from a family who've lost their homes to rising seas. Stay watching on 101 East.